C'est sûr. Bonsoir, membres du Conseil. J'espère que ça va bien. De vous souhaiter la
I hope
bienvenue.
everything's going well. I'd like to wish you bid you welcome to our regular meeting on September 5th. The clerk, we have quorum. I see that everyone's here. Number 3, declaring conflict of interests. Are there any members of the council who would like to declare a conflict of interest given the items on the agenda? Not seeing anything. Thank you very much. Number 4, approval of agenda. You see the agenda on your screens. Approval is moved by Deputy Mayor Sylvie Colette Boudreau. Seconded. Any questions? All those in favor shall say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Number 5.1, minutes of the minutes held on August 28th, last Monday. We just need a motion to approve the minutes.
Sorry, I didn't pick up on it sooner. I would have
No problem.
let the staff know. But with regard to item 14.1, there's a sentence there that says Harry McEnroy mentions that he doesn't normally take a position on zoning issues. I believe what I said was that I don't normally take a position opposed to the planning advice and crack advice.
I agree. That's councils. All members of council take a position on a zoning issue when it comes to a floor, when it comes to a vote. So if we can make that small amendment.
So with that change, I'll move the adoption.
Perfect. So moved by Councillor Harry McEnroy to adopt the minutes as modified. Appuyé de la conseillère Germaine Galland. Autre question.
Seconded by Councillor Jeanine Galland. Are there questions? Otherwise, all those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. Number 6, public presentations. We have 3 presentations tonight. First of all, the climate change adaptation plan for the Pointe-du-Chêne area. Julie, is it? Danielle. Okay. It's a bit of a brain fog. So this is Danielle from the Ministry of the Department of Environment and Climate Change. You can do the presentation in the language of your choice. Thank you very much, members of the council, for hosting us today.
Je m'appelle Danielle Légère et moi et
My name is Danielle Légère, and my colleague are here to represent the Department of Environment and Local Governments in the province of New Brunswick to speak about a climate change adaptation plan for Pointe-du-Chêne.
Climate change adaptation plan for the town of Pointe-du-Chêne. Sorry, did someone have a question? Question?
Yes.
Oh, je suis vraiment désolée.
Not that I can tell, no.
Okay, parfait. Alors, pour vous donner
So,
un petit peu
to give you a bit of background,
la province du Nouveau-Brunswick à travers
the province of New Brunswick, through the Department of Environment and Local Governance, adopted a plan to address climate change. There are many actions, and the objective is to be carbon neutral by 2050 to increase increase resilience for infrastructure and individuals, of course.
approved climate change action plan from 2022 to 2027. And the goal is to reach net zero by 2050, as well as build resilience for communities, people, and infrastructure. Alors, le plan est bâti sur...
So the plan is built on 3 pillars. The pillars are environmental responsibility, reducing greenhouse gases, and preparations for climate change.
Is preparing for climate change. Oh, désolé.
Yeah.
Sorry. We have a simultaneous translation, so you can stay in one language if you'd like. So sorry. So what this means, what does it mean to prepare for climate change? Well, first of all, that we be ready for the major changes that we are facing, that we accept them, and that we take proactive steps to address them. So the first is there will be more heat, of course. We predict that the province of New Brunswick will have an average heat level of it'd be 5 degrees higher than now. This means that species will migrate. There'll be an increase in water temperature and many other bad impacts on individuals and businesses. This would also mean that there'd be more drought. And of course, this will have an influence on agriculture, and it could increase forest fires. There'll be more storms, and storms that we have will be more severe. For the next little while, it will include winter and tropical storms. And this has an impact on infrastructure. This includes electricity, and the electricity grid, and water and rainwater. There will be an increase in precipitation. So precipitation will increase on an annual basis, and each event could be more severe. This has major consequences for infrastructure. Again, there will be an increase in the sea level by about a meter from here to 2100. And this will add to the effect of storms and the increase in sea level, such that each event will become more severe with greater consequences. And this adds to increased risk for communities, infrastructure, natural resources, and environmental sectors, and of course individuals who will be experiencing all those events. So on this slide, you have some of the actions that the department is foreseeing up to 2027 to tackle climate change and to adapt. The most important one for us tonight is the plan for climate change adaptation plan for local governments. Well, of course, local governments in the Department of Environment and Local Government and the Secretariat for Climate Change, they are such an important partner. Our goal for this plan is to have 50% of all of the communities to adopt an adaptation plan by 2025 and 100% by 2030. The town of Shediac, the former town of Shediac, had adopted a plan in 2019, but with the local reform in local governance, you have a larger territory, and Pointe-du-Chien was not included in that preceding plan. That's why we applied to the Environmental Trust Fund to establish a plan for that region, for that area. So the advantage of an adaptation plan for local government, I've raised a few. The first one, there are grants available through the Environmental Trust Fund. That means that the council and the town don't need to finance the development of the adaptation plan, but can derive all the benefits from it. The plan allows you to have better planning and be better prepared in terms of all of the effects I mentioned before. It allows local data that is very precise. It's through a consultant that this plan is developed, and he has access to a whole host of resources, those of the Department of Environment and Local Governance, mapping that predict sea levels and erosion levels. And it can also be used for infrastructure, especially federally, but also provincially. We know that there's money for the municipalities and local governments, the municipalities who want to be proactive in terms of infrastructure and climate change, and to have an adaptation plan that is more and more required to apply for those grants. So I will quickly go over the process and to prepare the adaptation plan. So the first step, Wendat already did it, is for Pointe-du-Chien, is to apply to the trust fund for environmental trust fund for a grant and to receive the grant. A council could, of course, spend its own monies if it wanted to. without those funds. The creation of an advisory committee that includes people responsible for infrastructure, members of the community, a member of the council. The idea is to frame the work of the consultant to as much information as possible on the community for which he's preparing a plan. And the first meeting of the advisory committee will happen tomorrow. And first thing on the agenda will be to look at the call for tenders for the consultant who will be chosen and hired. The consultant is the person who does much of the work for the adaptation plan. He or she takes the data and applies it to the community itself. The consultant will then evaluate the risks in terms of the public consultation and with consultation with stakeholders, including those who are responsible for major infrastructure in the area, recreation center, and safety infrastructure. This is to ensure that the data that they collect is humanized, so that it's a real reflection of the community. Next, the plan will be presented to citizens, the advisory committee, and the council. And should the plan meet the expectations, it will be presented and then adopted by the council. So I just want to plug my colleagues in terms of greenhouse gases and also greenhouse gas reduction plans. For all the reduction plans, there is grants available for reducing greenhouse gases. If you want to be proactive, if you want to go seek out those funds and all the expertise that accompanies it, please don't hesitate to speak to me. I would be pleased to connect you with my colleagues. They would be very pleased to hear from you. I asked before, and they said that you don't yet have a plan. It's never too early to get one. Just like me, their objective is to get 100% of local governments that have a plan by 2030. So there we go. So thank you very much for having invited me to do this presentation. I'm pleased to take your questions in the language of your choice. Should you have any questions? Thank you very much. So I see a few. I'll let the members of the council. We're probably thinking of the same things, I would think. Councillor Paul Boudreau. Yes, thank you. First of all, congratulations for this initiative to draw up this plan. We experienced things this 4 or 5 years ago with the town. When do you plan on starting, and when do you plan on finishing this exercise? Given that the grant application was done through the Environmental Trust Fund, there's a set date for the plan to be deposited. I believe it's March 15th, so that it can match up during the fiscal year. Once the grant is received by the organization that that made the request, they're the same people who are responsible for meeting deadlines. When that organize the first or meeting for the advisory committee tomorrow, and then they want to have the consultant hired by the end of September. Does that answer your question? Yes, it's great. You said you referenced that Pointe du Chêne is part of Greater Shediac. Are there any specific requests coming for the town? Human resources, perhaps? Councillors, maybe? Are you already at that step in terms of what you need from us? I didn't understand the question. I'm referring to the plan that we had 2 or 3 years ago. The plan, the town had committed resources for the staff and personnel. Are you already there? Where you have a request for what you would need from the town? If I've understood correctly, the grant application, there were conditions attached to it, and one of it was that one of the council members sit on the committee. The mayor, your worship, offered to sit on the advisory committee, and that's what we need, as well as opening to consider the plan once it's prepared. Thank you. My pleasure. That's all for me, your worship. Councillor Murray Lloyd.
Thank you for your presentation.
My pleasure.
In 2022, the program was done with the town of Shediac. Was the local district of Shediac Cape taken into consideration at that time? I'm asking her.
I am not sure,
Thank you.
but it's a question I could take back to some of my.
Could you, so that I can prepare myself for any of my constituents?
So could you be a little bit more precise about the question? So are you?
The question is, I represent was the local service district of Shediac Cape.
Mhm.
Was that area taken into consideration when you did your plan for climate change for the town of Shediac?
If it was within the municipal boundary of Shediac at the time, it would.
It wasn't.
Then probably not. But we have a conseiller who said yes, so I'm not sure, but I will check into it.
Since
If I may, the climate change adaptation plan that was done in 2019 was according to the old borders of Shediac only. It did not include the adjoining local service districts. It was only for the municipality itself. In this case, prior to the amalgamation, although shortly before 2019, nobody was kind of expecting that the borders would be widened or broadened. So in 2022, the Red Dot Association of Shediac Bay, made a application to the Environmental Trust Fund for the Pointe du Chêne area only. Now, mind you, at that point, amalgamation was not officialized as of yet. So there would be a potential to get a climate change adaptation plan for Shediac Cape, Scoodok Road, as well as Scoodok, the other adjoining areas, because they probably don't have one. At least I don't know of any in Scoodok, and I doubt the members of Scoodok would know. So that there was one. So
Shediac,
that's where we're at.
Yeah. Shediac proper, that is the old Shediac before amalgamation, is the only area that currently has an active adaptation plan within all the communities that were amalgamated into the town of Shediac.
So from what I heard, we were not taken into consideration.
Not at that time, no.
Thank you.
But
So
we can get one going. That's also an option.
I'm not disputing that. I want to get the answer. That's all.
Sure.
Thank you.
And I will just also say that if I'm allowed to elaborate a bit on this, this is a big priority for the Climate Change Secretariat and for the department generally. So if there are other places that are considering adaptation plans, we strongly encourage them to apply to the Environmental Trust Fund. Or you don't have to apply to the Environmental Trust Fund, but there is money available there.
Hey, if somebody wants to contribute to getting a local climate change adaptation plan, I think we'd be interested.
Yes.
Yeah. Sure. Merci beaucoup, madame.
Ça me fait vraiment plaisir.
Thank you very much, ma'am. It was my great pleasure. So now you're aware of that. Number 6.2. It's an application to the Housing Accelerator Fund. Was this the director who spoke to that? I'd like to invite Jonathan Chevary, our environmental development. I'd like him to Mr. Chevary. Just 1 second. Mr. Chevary is also our technician. So sometimes okay. Thank you, Your Worship. I didn't want to forget the councillors who helped us with this file. Mr. Niol, who is virtually with us. Mr. Neil. Technology is always fun. So today we're here to speak to the Housing Accelerator Fund, about the Housing Accelerator Fund. It's a fund of $4 billion from the federal government through CMHC, and is to incite municipalities to change their policies in terms of the need for housing, be it affordable housing or mid-market. This is where we're placing ourselves to submit to the half program. We applied for these funds, and it's based on the housing supplies that we need for our region.
And units type, and also affordable units that we're projecting for the town of Shediac and its area. That includes Shediac Cape and also Pointe du Chien and Skidoo. So basically the funding is 4 installments over 3 years, 25% upfront. These money would go towards infrastructure projects. It'll be to implement the action plan also that we've put together at really a high level at this point. And there are also some community field projects like Fire Hall, for example, that could be a contributing factor for housing supply in the future. If we're successful, the Shediac could receive upwards to $8 million from the half program, and it's really based on strength and scoring of the application. So the application is really to go forward with like the program or the fund is called the Accelerator Fund, to really go forward and move forward quickly to be able to answer to the demand of housing. So the overview of the process that we've took, so it wasn't just me and Neil on the screen that were kind of in our office, kind of scrambling together. Obviously, we had a great conversation and a lot of meetings in a month and a half, we could say. By the time we get things started and the application got up, we needed to apply for August 18. We did work with the engineering department, also Plan 360s. Our expert, Phil and Jeff, were also on board with all the policy at really at a high level and what it could look like and shape and form our application. Also, Turner Drake did a housing need assessment that was required, or should I say a basic housing need assessment that was required to apply for this Housing Accelerator Fund to make sure that we were in favor. And also it gave us tools as administrators to better understand the need of the community and what type of market that we're lacking in the population also. So what we need from you today, I guess, after that, Neil will present all the initiatives at really high level, is the support of council to participate, and that we can start moving forward with the green light to kind of maneuver around the application following the answers from CMHC. As of yet, I've checked early today that we didn't have a response yet, but it should come shortly because it was money and funds that they wanted to distribute to municipalities to kickstart this project. So, Neil, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Jonathan. I'll proceed entirely in English. I'm sorry, mon français est très mal. That's the best French I can speak right there.
My French is pretty terrible.
Yeah, just to pick up on that quick introduction from Jonathan, I'll give a very quick sort of overview of the needs assessment. It is, really kind of a nuts and bolts, just data-based assessment, really focused on just kind of getting the information we needed for the application, as well as to kind of have a needs assessment on the books to get those extra points for the application evaluation. And then very quickly, just give that overview of the action plan initiatives themselves. And hopefully have some time to stick around and help with any questions or discussion that may follow. So very quickly, first through the needs assessment, just kind of looking at your overall housing supply. And again, this applies for the most part as best as we could get it with the data available. It applies to the current municipal boundaries of Shediac. So there may be some numbers that are, if you have any of these kind of already in your mind, if any of this looks a little different, it may be because these are either updated numbers or because we've had to estimate in lieu of having more accurate data given just how recent those boundary changes were. But there's just shy of 1,000 regularly occupied dwellings, so there's about 5,600 say dwelling units housing homes in the municipal boundaries in total. About 13% of those are just not regularly occupied, census term, so they're either just single properties probably a lot of them have been taken. Both properties from older businesses again, that sort of thing. But about 4,900 permanently occupied dwellings and households in the municipality. Most Canadian communities of its size, sort of the majority of those are single detached homes, and then those that aren't single detached homes tend to be low-rise rental apartment units. You've got a pretty typical split, about 70-30 for owner-occupied versus renter-occupied units. And you've been doing a pretty good job over the last few years of continuing to add to this supply. So you've been, over the last 20 years, have pretty consistent large additions to the housing inventory, but these numbers aren't adjusted for population. So when you look at that breakdown by age, the 1970s really stick out as probably on a per capita basis, a really significant period of growth. We've had similar numbers of homes built over the last 20 years, but the town population is much higher now than it was in those days. And looking at more recent trends, and this is looking specifically at building permits, so not dwelling units per se. There's, as I'm sure you're aware more so even than me, the last 2.5, 3 years have been quite significant increase in development activity, development interest in the community. We've seen this sort of across the country, certainly in Atlantic Canada. The pandemic has really changed a lot of dynamics and trends across the board. And interesting to note as well, in these last couple of years of permit data, having for the first time really a significant contribution from sort of 2-unit semi-detached dwellings sort of falls within the missing middle, quote unquote, category of housing types that we'll talk about later on as part of the HAF program. So I guess really the main takeaway is that we certainly expect an increase in supply coming in the near term, although the jury is really out to know how long these trends are going to persist, just given how significantly different they are from the past, and also some headwinds as well. Looking at the current sort of state of housing need in the community and looking at some indicators that come from the census, these are the terminologies: inadequacy, unsuitability, and unaffordability. That last one is fairly intuitive, but inadequate housing really just means housing that's not in a suitable state of repair, requires major repairs, and that's assessed by the person filling out the census living in the home. Whereas unsuitable deals with the size of the dwelling to the household that's occupying it. So it's sort of overcrowding. Are there enough bedrooms for the number of people that would require bedrooms under the occupancy standards? Really, the biggest issues here, you'll see in red some big percent changes from 2016. This is the 2021 census data being compared. That's not unusual, just because these first two categories tend to be sort of the smaller indicators in terms of people that are having trouble. Although it is interesting to note such a significant increase in overcrowding in the owner-occupied housing, specifically that middle row there. Possibly just folks, as housing affordability has become more of a constraint, staying in houses that are too small for their growing families, perhaps. The other important thing to note is that on unaffordability, which is usually, and in this case as well, the most significant indicator in the community, in 2021, the census incomes were in many cases affected by income supports that were related to the pandemic. So the CERB, the Emergency Income Replacement Benefit, these have really kind of messed with our data quite a bit for housing analysts, because that went directly to household incomes, which shows across the country, this very significant decrease in rates of housing affordability, which it was happening at a time that housing affordability by all other measures was getting much worse. And that's really the distortion here, is just that one-time sort of income support program that was really messing with the calculation of cost of housing relative to incomes. And so you really shouldn't take these trends since 2016 as indicative of what is going on today, now that those programs have been wrapped up. looking at these same indicators by the age of the people, sort of the leading the household, you could say, kind of helps get around that income issue. Specifically, if we look at the 65 plus, the far right column there, and go down to the bottom row there, households in unaffordable living conditions, folks that are 65 or older, generally retired, generally not earning income during the pandemic, and therefore were not large recipients of those income replacement programs through the pandemic. And so you can see that segment of the community had a 29% increase in rates of households living in unaffordable housing. We can probably assume that maybe a similar percentage is the reality for many of these other age groups as well. Now, again, that those income programs are no longer active. You can see, the counterpoint being that when they were active, we had significant decreases in rates of housing unaffordability. So looking at the data around household incomes and the unaffordability indicators, we've estimated the following breakdown of affordable housing deficits in the community. This you really can treat as a minimum, again, because of those pandemic distortions I just mentioned earlier. And really the most significantly impacted size of household and income level is single person households earning low incomes. You can refer to the full report for what these income categories mean, but they're all really just a percentage of what the median income for the community is. So low income, you can kind of I guess keep in your mind as maybe a single person or a group of roommates or someone like that, or a couple with a single income earner, perhaps, that's generally sort of earning a minimum wage type of job. And so based on that analysis, we say there's overall need for 425 affordable housing units of various types, and the majority is for that single person household, probably older households as well. And really the price ranges for those groups that are affordable is something costing $280 to $650 a month. Looking now to the future, we've done a population growth forecast. So depending on your range of assumptions between sort of low to high growth scenarios, we see Shediac growing by 2033 to between 14 and 15,000 people, which we estimate would add about 1,300 to 15,500 households over those 10 years. So looking kind of at the middle of the road growth rate, it anticipates that Shediac will grow by about 140 households per year on average over the next 10 years. Apologies for the wall of text here, but really the takeaway from all of that analysis is that if we look at rates of population growth and housing construction over the past few years, we estimate there's probably already a shortfall of about 330 to 370 housing units currently. And then with the forecasted growth and looking at recent rates of construction and just kind of carrying those forward as sort of a baseline, we think that could grow to be 560 to 905 units of shortfall by 2033. Now, like I said, there has been that significant boom recently in permits, and we have given that some consideration in this analysis, but there's also other reasons to think that that rate of construction, or at least the rate implied by that rate of permitting, probably won't continue going forward. We've got headwinds now that weren't reflected in those last couple of years, such as changes to interest rates, escalation in construction cost, some of the population migration patterns that were created by the pandemic and other impacts that the pandemic has wrought on our communities are starting to diminish as that continues to have run its course. And then, of course, within the town itself, there's certainly some infrastructure servicing constraints on that growth that would need to be dealt with as well. So, this type of analysis really is an educated guess about the future. There's always uncertainty about all of this stuff. But the takeaway really is that to the degree that we can't have an idea of what the future is going to look like, it's certainly not assured that the town is going to build enough housing for its forecasted growth. And so it really makes a lot of sense to try to be proactive at this time and do more, not just sort of sit back and assume that things will take care of themselves, because the status quo trends are not really going in the right direction. Not that things are terribly dire, but there's err on the side of caution, try to do more. And that really leads us into the Housing Accelerator Fund. And so I'll quickly talk about the housing supply target as well as the action plan. Those are sort of the two key pieces of the application itself. So every community that applies to the Housing Accelerator Fund has to develop two housing supply numbers. They have their sort of baseline or status quo forecast of how many housing units they're going to issue permits for over the next 3 years. And then they have another higher number, which is the number of units that they'll issue permits for with the support of the Housing Accelerator Fund. The big part of our engagement in this and our support to staff in preparing the application was doing a lot of the work around coming up with these targets and then sort of allocating them to initiatives and sort of getting into the technical estimations required for the application. But at the high level, based just on the average over the last 5 years, the status quo housing permit number for Shediac is 618 units. And then based on looking at that forecasted growth, as well as looking at details of the development projects that staff are already maybe aware of that aren't really officially applied for yet, but folks are working on them, so there are some details available, as well as looking at those action plan initiatives themselves and doing some other data analysis around permits and zoning. We've come up with a half-supported housing target of 863 units, which is, if you do the math, 245 more than your baseline, so a 40% increase over sort of that status quo forecast of the next 3 years. And so this is important because the application and the funding agreement, if the application is successful, essentially requires Shediac to commit to achieving this target. The action plan is the document that says how you're going to do that, what actions you're going to take to go above and beyond the status quo. But the part of the funding, especially in the later years, will depend on progress achieved in actually issuing this many permits. So we wanted to pick a number that was certainly above and beyond the status quo and results in a very advantageous amount of money coming through the HAF program, but also something that's certainly grounded in reality, that isn't going to raise eyebrows at CMHC in terms of being unrealistic or unreasonable, and something where we think you'll have a very good stand a very good chance of achieving this number. And may very well go over it, which is a better outcome than setting the bar too high and then falling short. So I mentioned the action plan itself. This is sort of the document that goes alongside those targets in the application and says, okay, here's our housing supply target, and then here's the plan that says what we're going to do that's going to result in that achieving that higher supply figure. It's a requirement of the application. For a community of the size of Shediac, there needed to be at least 7 initiatives within the action plan, and we've included 9, so we're also going for sort of above and beyond on the evaluation there. And in terms of the evaluation, what CMHC really wants to see is municipalities doing something that's different from what they've done in the past. They said this really quite explicitly to us when we were working on this, that they don't want to just be coming what municipalities are already going to fund themselves or should already be doing themselves. They want this program to incentivize, going above and beyond, doing something that's a real change from the norm. They also want to see a variety of initiatives. So in terms of the types of actions you're taking, as well as initiatives that will have an impact beyond just the 3 years of the program. So all the evaluation really happens within that time window, but you do get extra points if some of these things are going to leave a legacy of greater housing supply going forward as well. In terms of pulling together the initiatives for the action plan for Shediac specifically, there was quite a large list of potential initiatives provided by CMHC, and we spent a lot of time with staff and folks at Plan 360 to kind of go through those and pick out the ones that were best for Shediac's context. So those that certainly made sense for the type of housing issues and community form that exists in Shediac, as well as those that are really low-hanging fruit, you could say, in terms of things that either the town is already working towards, and now we can kind of fit those under the umbrella of the Accelerator Fund, or just things that are relatively easy that we can add in to make the application stronger. Again, kind of adding variety, going above and beyond the minimum number of initiatives. Overall, Shediac is really doing quite well on housing supply, and so the use of the funding we anticipate is really more around actual service and infrastructure projects. So the action plan initiatives themselves are really not going to be the main use of the funding, most likely, and there isn't as much of a need to come up with a very robust and extremely detailed action plan in order to hit that supply target, because we think it's relatively achievable with some small tweaks. Of course, there's nothing at all stopping you from taking it and running with it. Overall, the action plan outlines the initiatives at a high level. So it talks about the types of actions you're going to take, the types of policy changes you might consider. It maybe speculates at some ways it may be done, but it doesn't necessarily commit you to any certain sort of scale or course of action. You need to do something along those lines. You need to actually implement your action plan at the end of the day to receive the funding. But the details of how these individual initiatives really hit the ground in Shediac is part of the implementation itself, figuring out what is the best way to make some of these policy changes. So now I'll get into the action plan itself, starting with a couple that I've sort of grouped these by theme here. So starting with support specifically for affordable housing. We have an initiative around supporting affordable housing directly, and this is really the Affordable Housing Grant Program that has been in the works and is now something that we can fit into the HAF application. So this is just a fund that directly incentivizes and supports affordable projects, both brought forward by private sector market rate developers as well as non-market housing providers as well. We also have an initiative to enhance partnerships for affordable housing, which is really focused on that non-market sector, helping those players that exist in Shediac, and there really aren't many, to build their capacity, as well as identify and mitigate any barriers they're already experiencing in delivering affordable housing, as well as hopefully growing that sector and making more connections with others kind of in the broader area. Certainly looking with an eye down towards Moncton and some of the capacity and expertise in the non-market sector that exists there. Then in terms of more general sort of policy related support, and this is for affordable housing as well as just normal market rate housing as well. We have one looking at permitting denser forms of housing just kind of generally, and by dense we mean sort of the next step up from low density. So the R2 zone, the existing R2 zone, already does allow for what CMHC refers to as missing middle types of development, and really that's anything that's kind of, a step up from your detached house, so a duplex or semi-detached unit, all the way up to low-rise apartment buildings. But generally, missing middle is thought of to be, sort of like a triplex or a quadplex, something like that. Not necessarily larger multi-unit buildings that would have an elevator and common space, that kind of thing. So the R2 zone already allows for a lot of that, so it may be a matter of just applying that zone to more areas where it currently isn't applied to, and that could be maybe done very broadly or maybe done with an eye to other criteria that would kind of make it more targeted. There is also the potential to come up with a new zone. Maybe if the R2 zone on reflection isn't the best tool, there could be a new zone that's similar, that has different standards for this purpose, if that's the more appropriate route. And the other way to do this as well is to use the R2 zone or possibly a new zone as the base starting point for zoning in new development areas. So looking at both the existing built up areas of the community as well as when you're expanding with with new neighborhoods starting out at that higher point. So more of the housing will be denser. Not to say that some won't be detached housing, but it doesn't have to be exclusively that because of a policy restriction. And then going above and beyond that, supporting high density infill. This is envisioned to really be more focused along the area's sort of main urban streets where there's maybe underutilized land or surface parking lots, those types of things that could potentially be redeveloped into higher densities or, mid to high rise apartment building type stuff. And there's a variety of different ways that policy can support that by adding in maybe an infill overlay zone that then allows for more flexibility on development regulations, design requirements, parking, things like that. There's also an initiative to add flexibility for hidden density. And so this is related to accessory dwelling units, so like basement apartments, granny flats, those types of things. Looking at the existing regulations around those and then seeing where they can be modified to allow for more opportunities to do those types of units. For example, right now, the regulations only really contemplate accessory dwelling units as being within the main building, so a basement apartment, like I said. It's very common for accessory dwelling units in other communities to be allowed as a separate dwelling or a separate structure on the same lot. So you could think of like a backyard suite or a carriage house type of apartment building. That might be a way to go with this. As well as there's potential to add additional support for these types of dwelling units. They're typically built by homeowners, not necessarily more sophisticated developers. So things like pre-approved designs or other supports may be necessary to help uptake of those, just because the people undertaking them will just be, just more your average citizen rather than someone with a lot of expertise in development and construction. There's an initiative around parking requirements and reducing those. Basically, parking, if it's not needed from the proponent's perspective, tends to be either a significant use of land or significant construction cost if you have to get into underground or structured parking. And all of these things ultimately affect the economic viability of residential projects, either by making them need to charge a higher rent in order to make the business model work, or just need to build taller or something like that in order to get the number of units if you can't use as much of the site because it's required for parking, for example. So parking regulations are an opportunity to reduce requirements, to allow for more housing, to allow for more affordable housing, and can be used either generally or specifically for affordable projects, let's say, to kind of achieve specific policy goals. And then finally, there's a few around infrastructure and environment. And really the biggest one here is aligning infrastructure to support growth. So servicing capacity is an issue on development going forward, and there's certainly a benefit in coordinating, not only planning for expanding that infrastructure, but also coordinating that expansion with general land use planning. And so there's an initiative here to develop some servicing master plans specifically for stormwater and transportation, and then also take those into consideration when they're developed, but also through future plan reviews, harmonize the development regulations with the servicing planning. And then the final two are around climate change. And the previous presentation was fairly apt because, as you know, there's a 2020 climate adaptation plan for the former town of Shediac. So that has a number of items outstanding that can be a use of funds under the HAF program. So just implementing sort of what's already on the books with that added funding support. And then the final one, strengthening municipal climate change objectives, is kind of a repeat of the first one, but rather than harmonizing planning, land use planning and infrastructure, we're harmonizing land use planning and climate change adaptation planning. So just looking for that long-term benefit to plan for growth in a way that's resilient to the changing climate. And that is, supporting of housing and a qualifying initiative and use of funds under the action plan. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to stick around for discussion, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jonathan.
Awesome. Thanks, Neil. I don't know if member of council has any questions for Neil or for myself.
I imagine that's a lot of information. So, thank you. I'll start off by thanking you for the presentation, for that work that being done. It outlines the path forward that and multiple paths forward that we can use those funds should they get approved. I mean, at this point. Conseiller Roland Cormier.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Neil, for the presentation. It's quite a lot of stuff going on. What's the timeline of this project, government-wise, subsidy-wise? I presume there's a start and end date with government programs.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that'd be the first question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the program, according to CMHC, it runs from September 1st of this year to September 1st of 2026. Well, September at least. I'm not sure the specific date. The idea is that you're going to, like Jonathan said, you get 25% of the approved funding up front, and then another 25% at the end of each of those 3 years. So your progress on the initiatives, on implementing the initiatives, gets monitored over that time period, as well as the number of units permitted. And really in that final year, what CMHC has told us is that the funding amount itself may change depending on what your success is in hitting that housing target. So if communities are falling short of their target and really haven't made a lot of progress on their action plan initiatives, they may actually have some of that funding removed from their allocation by CMHC and redirected to other communities that are doing a better job. So that was part of the theory as well on our part with staff in preparing the application, to set a target that we feel is ambitious but achievable, because if you go over, then that's a bonus funding wise potentially, whereas if you have a shortfall, then you may find you don't have funding that you were otherwise counting on spending.
Thank you. Supporting affordable housing, you mentioned that a bit. Can you explain to us how that particular aspect of the program would happen if a developer comes in and he wants to build 4 units, you give him $400,000, or how does that work if they want to be part of this program?
I might speak to that, Neil. Sure. Conseiller Roland, on a travaillé avec un comité aussi que...
We worked with a committee before as well on affordable housing for over the last year. Your Worship, Councillor Janice, he is also on the board on this. Going around the table, I might be missing some. You as well. You sit on that committee. But you weren't present at the last meeting, but that's fine. We were looking at the percentages of what the possibilities are. What we could do at the end of 4 or 5 years, depending. I think it's 4 years that we really established in terms of the percentage that would be returning the tax as we apply for the HAF program. Is basically the amount budgeted for the HAF program could be allocated to affordable housing. That would support the creation of affordable housing. So that would be a minimal amount. It's not like in the 80s where we had programs and the federal government was paying a large part of the grant for the mortgage. It's not that type of program. Well, not entirely. It's an interesting program financially, though.
Say the rest in English, but I was involved in affordable housing for 15 years. So Neil, the newsflash for you, in a sense, on the New Brunswick housing side with the New Brunswick Housing Corporation in my professional life. And this is not the same type of program. It's not an ongoing subsidy program. This is an investment over a short period of time, but it's to get stuff built. And it's in a sense, a massive rollout of cash directly to municipalities, which is something that the feds have never done. Okay. So in that regard, that's interesting. Also of note, just in speaking with my colleague mayors from Southeast New Brunswick, as well as others, it appears that most of the applications are from the larger municipalities, which I would have expected. But this program is available to smaller municipalities, even, something a quarter of our size. But the smaller ones are not applying a whole lot, apparently. So we were lucky enough to get access to this company to develop the housing assessment, the basic parts of it, in order to put in an application. So that's helped us enormously and helped us to put in an application. So, I know the mayor of Moncton advised me that their applications was for they're getting approval for about 12 million. We're asking for 8. I mean, I don't know if we'll get all of that or not, but I think we got a fairly decent chance.
But the point I'm trying to get at is citizens in our area are looking for housing, but low housing.
And that's what this can provide.
Well, if I see here the numbers that you're talking about, we're still a long ways to find low housing. There was an announcement of last year, a year and a half ago, in Moncton of a low housing unit project, and the apartment rates were $1,500 to $1,800. Well, maybe for some $1,500 and $1,800 per month is not a lot of money, but for some it's a lot of money if you're living if you're working at McDonald's or on minimum wage.
Exactly.
You can't reach that sky.
That's not feasible.
Well, let's hope let's hope it works, and let's hope it helps those that really need help, because let's hope that's what the program is all about. But from what I've been told, I'll let I'll judge after the results and not before. Thank you.
Merci, Conseil Colomé. Conseil Paul Boudreau.
Councillor Paul Boudreau.
In regards to your census housing indicators, just comes to mind, I don't know who came up with the terminology, and some of them are quite alarming. I know you need shock words to try to get some money out of the feds, but you look at the numbers here: inadequate conditions, unsuitable conditions, 150 homes in Shediac. What do you describe unsuitable? I hope this document doesn't come into public view, because I like my town. I go, everybody around the table here, but you look at the numbers. Why do you come with unsuitable conditions when you look, or even inadequate conditions? It doesn't paint a good picture of our town when you got 290 and 150. Affordable, like Roland said, you can judge affordable from what you got money and spend, but these two terminology, where does it come from?
Yeah, well, those terms come from the federal government, from Statistics Canada and CMHC. It's the language that they've used in the census for I don't know how long, many decades now. So I agree. I have a frustration with them, because I can never recall what they actually refer to in terms of the actual measurement between inadequate and unsuitable. They're like you say, they're words that are obviously negative, but they're also not very descriptive of what it is they're actually referring to. But yeah, I guess to answer your question, that is just the standard language that the data and the collection tools and the census uses. It's not our editorial decision. From my perspective, working with this data in a lot of communities across the country, Shediac isn't doing, unusually bad or is not really outside the norm in terms of the percentages that we see in the data as well. So it's certainly an issue and one that requires attention, but it's not anything uniquely bad for Shediac, I would say.
Okay, don't use it as a promotional item when you look at.
Conseil Boudreau, I'll just add that.
Thank you.
Under that part that talks about inadequate conditions and unsuitable conditions, the share of households, that third line, and it's 6%. It's 3% of the household. So it's not close to being the majority, thankfully, in that regard. So, but there are some that need help. Absolutely.
I'll take ma connaissance, Il n'y a pas une maison Shediac.
To my knowledge, there's not one house in Shediac that's unsuitable, and there's not one that's inadequate. That's my point of view on my town, and I don't like to see such descriptions of our houses in town. I find it deplorable that there aren't better terminology that could describe it. It's a good document, but I'm a bit find it unfortunate to find those two words used associated with a town. It's a different world in terms of that terminology. Councillor Peter Bro.
Yes, my question is for Neil concerning plan initiative. When you talk about removing the need for parking, I assume that is to help the project viability. Are we talking about people renting that don't have any vehicles?
Do you want me to hop in, Neil? Yeah. So when we talked about that initiative, I should say, we talked more like maybe in the downtown core where maybe one car would be sufficient. And when we were talking about maybe affordable housing units, so that was kind of the context of what was kind of the conversation when we talked about that initiative as an action plan.
Because right now, when you look at the development, the most household has 2 cars, and if they don't have enough place to park, they end up parking in the street, and that creates other problems.
Yeah. And Jeff, I think, is here. Jeff, what's the right term for the buyback for parking? The cash in, yeah, there is a cash in lieu for to buy back some if you're.
But that's only for downtown.
Yes. No. It's in the radius range. How's the radius for
any zoning that requires parking? There's an option the council makes it cash in lieu of providing these.
Wow. Yeah.
So there is an option for that. Now the Conseiller Bro, I'll just tell you some of my professional experience being helping to build affordable housing in Moncton more so, but did some in Shediac a number of years ago. That was one thing that Moncton used in a fair number of projects in terms of a 40-unit apartment building would not get usually was like a 1.5 parking spaces per unit. Well, they reduced it to 1 parking space per unit, or they reduced it to less in some cases, but those were for affordable housing. Those are subsidized. So you're talking on people who can't afford the car. So, and you're within walking distance from grocery, from pharmacy, very centrally located areas. And they've never caused, I've kept tabs on them over the years, not recently, but has never been an issue. Usually the parking lot still has vacant parking spaces. It depends on the type of client or the type of resident that you have, I suppose, in those cases. But it can work. Parfait. Donc, merci beaucoup, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
No other questions? So, thank you much. Parfait. Donc,
okay, so we go on to the next item on the agenda, 6.3, downtown. For the 2024 budget. Good evening. Mike, yeah, you can lower the microphone if you want. I'm Annie Curroy, President of the Board of Directors of Downtown Shediac. I'm also a business owner, and I'm here with Annie Megara, my executive director. Thank you for receiving us to present our budget for the corporation. You all received the letter and the budget, 2024 budget. Did you? The downtown corporations are governed by the Act of the Provincial Government that says the municipality has to adopt the annual budget in order for the corporation to remain active. At our Board of Directors meeting on August 30, we passed our operating budget for the year 2024 with $119,000. We estimate that the revenues for this year will be for that year will be $106,000. It'll be 0.2 for each dollar of tax appraisal. We would ask you to approve our budget for 2024. Are there any questions? Questions from the councillors? It's similar to last year's budget. So this is we're in known territory. Councillor Boudreau, thank you. Is there a development across from the Bank of Montreal? Does that change the dynamic of your revenues? Is that going to change your revenues to any extent? Currently, well, it's under construction, so it is considered under construction, but once it is completed and occupied, then it will increase our revenues. So that'll work. That'll apply to the 2025 budget. That is correct. Thank you. Your Honor, thank you. Now, where does the downtown start and end? Downtown starts at the City Hall and goes all the way to where exactly? Maybe you could specify that for me. It starts at Rue Chesley here, and it goes to Adorable Chocolat, and the others across the street, which is St. Anne Street, to the City Hall. That also includes Donut Street and a lot on Sackville Street. That's so the Shediac Hotel, that is, and also the multifunctional center. That's all part of it.
Donc, est-ce qu'on a besoin? Ça, c'était pour. On a besoin de faire un vote pour ce soir.
We do have to vote on that, don't we?
Ah, OK. Ça passe des présentations. Parfait, c'est le prochain.
So then we move on. No, we don't have to vote on it. So next point. Also, a new thing is that we're setting up a gift card to encourage people to shop in the downtown core. And this will be implemented later in the fall. I want to especially thank Emile O'Brien, who is on our board of directors, for his dedication. And in my name, on my behalf and on behalf of the board, and also the director of Centreville Downtown, we want to thank you for your cooperation with the Corporation Centreville. So, thank you.
Merci, madame.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien, did you have a motion? Okay, next point.
Parfait. Donc, au numéro de correspondance 7.1, Shediac.
7.1, Shediac correspondence. Yes, so I don't have to present it since it was already presented by the executive director, but it was a motion to adopt the budget and the steps that we have to do to make sure that it is compliant with the law so that the province can apply this tax on behalf of Centreville Shediac Downtown. Okay, Councillor O'Brien, I move that we adopt it. Well, should we read it? Okay, let's read it first. It's all written down here. All right, fine.
Oh non, il y a une phrase auparavant, là. Considérons, là.
Sorry, okay. There's a sentence before that.
Considérant que le conseil municipal a reçu le budget
since the
pour 2024 au centre-ville Shediac Downtown, dans le but de le faire approuver.
We've received the budget, the operating budget, and be resolved that the clerk, on behalf of the council, take charge of publishing this under the act. I'm stripping over my words here. I don't know what it is, but
à la vie publique relativement à l'adoption de tel arrêté et que la date limite pour recevoir les objections écrites
and that the deadline be for objections be set for October 31, 2023. Moved, seconded. Any questions about the motion? And if not, then seeing none, then have we got okay? All in favor? All opposed? It carried. Brings us to number 8. The reports from standing and special committees. That'll come at the next meeting. Protective services. That was Marc Béliveau. I understand that you wanted to present an overview of certain things, but unfortunately, the statistics that I currently have, they only go from January to July 1st. We're supposed to. We'll get the summer statistics in a few weeks, but first of all, the files that we dealt with, we had an increase of 16% change with respect to the same period in 2022. And during that period, we had a 4% increase in property crimes. As to violent crime, that was a change of only 1%. I can go into a little more detail about what this means. The 16%, we have an increase in traffic violations. We had a lot more patrols this summer to try to catch certain dangerous driving, and some of these people are off the road now. So as to traffic, as I said, traffic violations, there's been an 11% increase there. And property crimes, break and enter. We have an increase of 4%, which includes 17% of break and enter crimes. In July, we had 5. 12 the previous month. So there was an increase there. We've also seen an increase in carjacking. An increase of 27%. That's the data for the month of July. 11 vehicles were reported stolen. That's almost twice as much as the previous month, which was 6.
Ça a monté, les méfaits ont monté de 36%, donc du graffiti.
We've also seen 36% increase in misdemeanors, graffiti and that sort of thing.
Le numéro pareil, gros, quand on dit une augmentation de 36%, mais c'est quand même plus bas que ce qu'on avait en 2019, 20, 21. C'est juste, c'était.
36% was very low in 2022, so it's really not that big an increase with respect to earlier years. Since July, we have arrested and indicted 9 or repaired drivers, or charged rather. Increase in the number of complaints. About homeless people living in so we've increased our patrols there. We have a higher presence of officers there. And as I said, motor vehicle theft has grown rapidly. One of the main reasons that we're seeing was that the people left their vehicles unlocked and the keys were in the car. In most cases, that is what happened. There are not too many cases where we see someone who actually, breaks a window or jumps the vehicle. It was really basic stuff. Basically, these are people who seized the day, sadly. So basically, well, what can we tell you? Keep your vehicles locked and don't put the keys in them. And don't have valuables visible from outside. Well, what do you know? We have learned tonight that you should keep your vehicle locked. That doesn't mean you necessarily. A couple other things. We have a new corporal who will be beginning in early October. One of our corporals is left a few months ago. New corporal, so local, someone who lives in Shediac. We'll have a supervisor living in the community. That'll be good. We're very happy to have this person with us. Ben Desjardins.
Okay.
Corporal Ben Desjardins. He's worked in Saint-Quentin. He's worked in Western Canada. So now he's coming back home. That's right. And we're happy to have him. Apart from that, this is the first day back to school. So we were patrolling around the school, so the regions, to make sure that our students, our children, were safe. And we had good comments from the parents and school staff. They were happy with our work, and we'll carry on doing that to make sure that everything goes well. Today was a good day to let people know that it's today everybody's going back to school, so you might want to slow down around school in school zones. Yeah. Well, one day at a time, we were quite visible this morning, so people knew that they better slow down into those school zones. Thank you. Any questions? I always ask about, we get complaints about all-terrain vehicles that may not be permitted, that maybe are driving up and down the roads at high speeds, making a lot of noise. Have you seen this, and have you been able to go to certain residences, talk to the parents, and put a stop to this? Because I'm worried for that they might kill themselves, or that they'll kill somebody else. People are afraid of these folks. I'm glad you brought that up. In terms of the police and traffic safety, we don't like that either. We're doing as much as we can. We're trying to prevent it by working with public safety. Mm-hmm. They're more on the trails than we are, as for us, because this has happened to me too while I was on patrol. What we see people popping wheelies on Main Street on Shediac. I can turn on my lights. I can, and they may just keep on going. It's like a balance of probabilities. So, and we can't prosecute them. We can try to arrest them, or stop them. But if they don't stop, we're not going to. We don't want to get into a high-speed chase with them. We don't want to hurt anybody. It might be a 14, 16-year-old who does certain things. We don't want that person to wind up hurt. So we try to educate people on our side, educate the parents to control their children and make sure that they know what they're doing and that they make good choices with their ATVs. But there's a portion of the population that doesn't want to obey the rules. So they don't want to listen to us or their parents. And so we kind of have to do as much as we can without going too far. I get the point. We get complaints all the time from people who are about, about ATVs zipping down the road at 3 a.m. We're doing what we can. So they, at least maybe when they see you, they might just slow down a little bit because they might be worried that things they might sort of get the wind up, and that after all there can be such injuries, and we don't want that to happen. And as for us, we try to do as much patrolling and be as highly visible as we can. And we hope that will be a bit of a deterrent. When people see police on Main Street, they're like, no, maybe I shouldn't pop a wheelie right in front of them.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Thank you, Corporal. Continue your fine work. So, number 8.2, fire services. It's the same statistics we had previous meeting. The CAO noticed that. There's some information for seasonal events. Raising some funds for muscular dystrophy, participation in Parc Pascal Poirier, Canada Day. We always want they always help out. We asked them to include that in the report. It was something they did before. So this gives us a bit of a sense of things. We don't have any report for building permits to be for another meeting. And in terms of the CAO's report, you did a type of summary of some files, some updates in terms of where we're at. That was for your information. Do you have any questions regarding the CAO's report? To allow me, Your Worship, I tried to change the format a bit. Continue to add files to the list just to give you some small updates on key files. Sometimes it's some real hot topics, sometimes to let you know where we're at with various projects. So if you have any comments or questions regarding the format, you can share that with me. If there's any questions, I can certainly try to answer as well. Perfect. Great. Your report was clear. No questions. That's great. So in number 10, recommendations from the SERSC, the 360. Maybe we should change that terminology. No recommendations for tonight. Nothing set out under unfinished business, and no introduction of new business. So number 13, inquiries by members of council. Would certain members of the council have inquiries or questions? Councillor Paul Boudreau. 3 points, just a summary. And actually, thank you, Victor, for the report. It's very interesting. It's well done. The thing for works on Ohio Road, can someone let us know? It seems like I'm mentioning Ohio Road the last 2 weeks, but nothing's moving. Can somebody answer why? Yes. There's a small delay, unfortunately, on that project. And the delay was such that we're waiting on the company who's doing the curbs. That's why the project is on a slowdown. They're so busy and the schedule is so tight. And it's unfortunate that you lose a few days of work because of weather or other reasons. That's how the general contractor lost his contractor that he was using for curbs. That's what we're waiting on. I think that was the only thing remaining for that one. And the other projects, Well, certainly they're making progress, but the weather did cause some delays for all of our infrastructure projects with the large quantity of rain that fell. But the work continues nonetheless. Thank you. The other point I saw on Facebook, it was a town hall meeting. It's a great idea. It was convened for Shediac Cape next week, I believe. I have questions for this. If you'll allow, who convenes those meetings? Is it you or your worship? Mr. Monterey? It was convened, we discussed with Murray Lloyd. He's the first one who came with a date, September 12th for Shediac Cape. And we're looking for dates for Skuduk, where we do Skuduk Road and Skuduk with Councillor Joël Desprez and Renard Cormier. And last one would be Harry McEnroy in Pointe du Chêne. I asked this question, are they translated? Will you have simultaneous translation for francophones during those meetings? Well, the request has been made, but we might foresee it. It's a good point. Will it be broadcast on the internet? It's not supposed to be online, no. What was the other thing asked? Will there be specific topics during these town hall meetings? Or will there be an agenda? There's an agenda that's, the presentation is to establish the town council. How does it work? For people who have always been in local service districts, that were amalgamated with the town of Shediac. They just to discuss the role of the council. Councillor will be there to discuss it. The mayor will be there as well. We'll talk about those things. We talk about the amalgamation and what it represents. What does it mean? Because the taxes that you pay. This is good. That's the idea, to demystify all of everything that's happened since amalgamation. And who will be running those meetings for Shediac Cape? It comes from Murray Lloyd wants to be the MC, so we're expecting a very great show that night.
Mais c'est un peu l'idée. Donc, pour les autres en tant que
So that's the idea. For the others, nothing's established yet. But probably we'll make the same request on the part of the councillors. The councillors also know Mr. Lloyd. He also knows the people there. There's Joël as well, and Mr. Desprez, and Mr. Cormier as well, and Mr. McEnroy for Pointe du Chêne. So I think it's a good way to really start off the night well with the councillor and the mayor and the whole team there. I'm fully in agreement. So how will people be advised of those meetings? We made posters. Mr. Lloyd went door to door. So we created that event on Facebook to try to share it. And when the two other dates will be added, we'll do the same thing. And thank you very much. Will there be a report shared with all the members of the council? The results of what people say to Murray and the other members, because eventually it affects the entire town. Will there be something that we can consider? The idea is not to have minutes per se, but if there's some issues brought forward by residents or even by the people present or councillors or during discussion, yes, it would be important that we prepare some sort of report, but not minutes per se. Just a recommendation. I saw that on the internet. Eventually, it affects all of the town councillors. I hadn't known it was happening actually, and I saw it in Experience Shediac. It's really Shediac. It's on the Shediac's Facebook that we did the event. The idea is that we were meant to have dates, but with the shifting of meetings, the schedule changed. The idea is to share it as much as possible and to promote it through social media. I congratulate you on this initiative. J'ai une autre question.
Inquiries? Moi, je vais ajouter.
Good.
You're good?
To add something. I'd like to add is simply to explain how the municipality works. Municipality 101, basically. Basically, what happens for the municipality? speak to the Shediac Bluff Association, that section of Pointe du Chêne. And so, sir, a retired engineer, a nice guy, he just wanted to know, so what are you doing with my taxes? Now it's going to Shediac. He understood that his taxes were going to the municipality. I would say it's simple. It pays for the police. It pays for the firefighters to pick up the garbage. Pays for the same services that you had before. He did all right. Well, thank you. He thought maybe we're doing something else, but well, somebody has to pay for the RCMP. Somebody has to pay to pick up the garbage. There's a contract for that. The evening, in addition to providing information, will be bear upon just kind of demystifying things here. What do you want from your municipality as well? If there's something that we can do to help you, like that section of the community, that community didn't have a voice before. It's something that could be discussed briefly at least. Well, we'll see.
Murray, you want to say something?
Murray?
Just a quick point to
Go ahead.
Councillor Boudreau. We had a template made, English and French, on the front. And why I pushed for this was the effects of amalgamation. Was getting a lot of phone calls. People just do not understand what has happened since January 1st. So I figured it was time that we got together and we explained to them, because I cannot answer any more questions about the roads. It's still not our responsibility. It's Department of Transport. So the other thing we have down here is community needs and how the municipality works, which I might chair it, but I won't be answering those questions.
Yeah.
So for anybody who wants to see these, this is a template that administration prepared. I think it's very good, and it can be names changed, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Parfait. Donc, il y avait une troisième question.
So there was a third question. I asked a question last week. Can you explain the details, the works done on top of Bellevue, descriptions, the cycling paths, who has done the work and why? Yes, I'm trying to explain to people, but this is an explanation from the CAO. Thank you, Mr. CAO. You'll remember that it came to the council where we were to participate in connecting the sewer line to serve the two subdivisions that are being built, Domaine du Faisan and Domaine Beau Séjour. There was a connection that had to be done on municipal land to the pumping station on Bellevue Street. That's the work that is happening right now. It's in parallel. It's parallel to the trail. They have not broken the trail. The trail was closed for a 24-hour period, I believe. Certainly, there'll be some work to do some landscaping on once the project is done. But it's a question of connecting the sewer line to reach the pumping station on Bellevue Street. It's work that were authorized by the municipality and that we've contributed to those projects. And it was done here during a council meeting, and the trail has not been broken, but it is certainly along the same corridor. Some trees were cut, certainly, but we'll ensure that the trail continues to serve the population. It is open now, but we have to make sure that it's safe as well during works. So that's something that we discussed with staff today to make sure that everything is done properly. Thank you. I want to recommend to do an aggressive tree planting program because the trail was really beautiful. Thank you very much, Victor. Very appreciated. That's all from me. Councillor Jean-Claude Bertin. He asked two of my questions, so I'll just ask my third. You only had three yourself? The main street, it's a new building. The electrical wires in front of the building, I imagine they'll be removed. I don't think so. They're gonna need power all along Main, and the wires are there. 4 or 5 people have spoken to me and said, look, I'd like to live on Main Street, but I don't want to sit outside with wires in my face. If there's something, that's why I'm asking if they would be removed and who would pay for that if it was going forward. It's not foreseen, I don't think so. I'm looking at the other departments. I don't think that was foreseen. The developer could have decided to add that to at his cost, but decided to make the building as it is. Thank you. Several years ago, I was a counselor at the time, 2017, let's say. We looked at removing a section of all of the electrical poles on Main Street to remove 15 poles. You had to install 44 in back, so they continue to provide electricity in the same buildings, the Caisse Populaire, the Co-op, etc. So I don't remember the cost, but the council at the time, it was 3 million maybe. I think it was more. We looked into it at the same time as we'd redone the whole downtown, the whole street, and no, it could not be absorbed in our budgets at the time. So we redid Main Street as originally foreseen at the time. It's just that when you're at Parc Pascal Poirier and you look at the building, and you have those big wires in front of the building. Once it's done, it's a bit of an eyesore. The developer knew where he was building as well. It's not the developer that was speaking to me about it. It's people who would like it's clients that the developer won't have. Great, Councilor Ronald Cormier. Thank you, Your Worship. I was on the cycling trail 8 o'clock this morning to check the damage or not. We'll give you a safety vest so that you can go. I can confirm that the cycle path is not busted up, but it would be good to have trees, as Paul was saying. The trees are not lost, not over the pipe, because the roots will go into it. A question I asked last meeting and I haven't received an answer yet, so I'll try again. I'll try the same question again. As you know, there was a storm, a rainstorm that invaded Sebastien Street. That allowed the residents of that area to go do some canoeing in the street. So where are we on that file? I'd like to know. Is it a normal thing? Have we been told that we were told that we were discussing with consultants? Have we had those meetings with consultants? Is there anything to share? There's lots of discussion underway, obviously. I don't have the whole history. I was not there. I think that the first flood, it was in 2019, if memory serves. After that flood, and in 2019, when the street flooded, it also flooded the basements of the homes. After that, works were done by the municipality, pretty significant major works to redirect water and redo certain drainage systems, etc. They even used the trail. They adjusted the trail in that region to allow for some redirection of a certain volume of water. And the last time there was a big storm, it's true, there was some water on the street, but there was no water in the basements of homes. That was the most worrisome question, the biggest question. But there was some water that accumulated on the road. We asked the engineers if there was something else that could be done, some other investments that could be done. That's not the type of answers you can get in 2 weeks, Councillor Cormier. It can take months sometimes to study and reconfigure the system. We're being explained that the projects that are planned for Main Street, just in front of us actually, in 2024, will alleviate part of that, because right now all of those waters basically come here, and we have problems with capacity. The same flooding happened on Main Street here as what happened on Sebastian Street. So these are all things that we're studying. There's no magic answer. We have more rain than before. It would seem so anyway. And engineers are working to try to find solutions that could prevent this type of event from happening again. I would say as well, it's not an answer. It's not in defense of it. It's not just happening in Shediac. It's happening everywhere. With that last storm, many municipalities saw similar situations, similar to what we experienced here. We're working closely with our engineers, trying to find solutions, but there's no magic solution.
Merci. Je vais attendre.
Thank you.
Je vais donner chance aux coureurs, à tous les coureurs.
I will let everybody to take a look at this. Let everybody take a look at this.
Un dossier si facile que ça.
It's not that easy to understand this issue, but we'll see how we make progress on this issue. I realize that we didn't have basement flooding this time, and I hope we won't next time. If I was a resident of that region, I would be very worried about my property value. And when you have flooding, it's not always that easy to sell. Or to stay there with the fear of having flooding next time, but we'll let the professionals handle it. And hopefully you'll come up with at least one option for how we can resolve this. Thank you, Your Lordship. The other Councillor Cormier. Have we gone out to tender on this? When we go out to tender, can we look at finding out how much time it will take to do this during the summer and have two sites on the same tender, because we're going to have the festival. Maybe they could go to a different spot on Main at that time. If you recall, a few weeks ago, we came for approval for funding to give our engineers the go ahead to start the design. So there's still plenty of work to be done at that level on design, preparing the calls for tender. Obviously, this is something we can look at, but I can almost guarantee you that if we put conditions on it like that, then the prices are going to go up quite a lot. Our construction season, it takes place during a certain period of time. They can't start too early before the spring thaw, during spring thaw, and they can't go too late either because of bad weather. But we can put conditions in it, but that will definitely raise the price of this project. But once we have more details on the design and the project estimates and so on, we can certainly look at all of that and come back with options for you.
But I can guarantee you that anytime you try to put limits like that on the contractors, that raises the price. I wasn't thinking so much about conditions, but just maybe just having a second work site so they can work in one place or another at all times, but they could just move from one to the other depending on how we need during the periods of time. You know, they come back to the first job and finish that one. But but you know, it's a big project on Main Street. We're talking from Chesley all the way to Bonfoche, including the intersection with Riverside Street. So this is not a project you can do in 2 months, not a chance. So even if we had other projects that for them, where we could sort of shuffle them off there when we needed to, it's still, then there won't be enough time to finish the project on Main Street, because it'll be a 2 or 3 year project instead of a 1 year project. So you see, you can look, as I said, we can look at all the options, but you know, but I'm not saying conditions, no conditions, but we've been doing this on Main Street for so long. You know, it's our business. This is our downtown, and our downtown is struggling. And I really want to try to find some solution or other that would enable us to lessen the impact on people on Main Street, business owners. You know, the impact is pretty big. After the pandemic was a pretty hard hit. And then, you know, next year, could we just have some options so we can look at, see which one will cause the least pain without, you know, raising the cost to absorbent levels. But we can look at the different estimates from our consultants. Sure, why not? Just so we can see, you know, we'll see how much more we'll have to pay to do that. You know, if there's a cost, then we should know what that cost is. That is, after all, taxpayer money, so we have to be careful about that. We always have to be prudent with how we spend it. Thank you. So we have a motion this evening for the number 15. Right. Give you a bit of context. This has gone over. This is a request over the last few months that fell between the cracks, if you wish. It was a request made in February. And the idea is we need to accept the new mandates of the people who are sitting on the Municipal Library Commission. We have it in French and English, and it's simply a matter of a motion from the council to approve those folks and their mandate. Would you like to move that? Be it resolved that we accept the mandate of these people for the Municipal Library Commission as presented. That is moved by Councillor Dupré and then seconded by Councillor Bertin. Questions? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Carried. Thank you. Don't have any nominations to the committees. Number 16 and number 17, we need a vote to adjourn the meeting. Moved by Germaine Galland. Thank you very much.